And here goes, Flying Horses by the local group Patchwork.
Who believes in knights in shining armor. She says they'll slay the dragons when they come. She's not just an ordinary woman, I know. I think she's a princess from a far-off land.
I know a man who believes in the people around him. Sees the good in me and everybody else. He says that everyone needs to tell the truth, and when they don't, he's always first to forgive. Just like nature untouched by human hands, that's exactly who he is. Looking at life with the eyes of a child, reaching out through the innocence.
Well, she's a woman who believes in the life she lives.
Oh, he's a man who believes in the life he lives.
I know a woman who believes in flying horses and in dreams that always do come true. And she believes in the world around her. Woman, this world's a better place because of you.
Just like nature untouched by human hands, that's exactly who he is. Looking at life with the eyes of a child, reaching out through the innocence.
Yeah, she's a woman who believes in the life she lives.
Oh, he's a man who believes in the life he lives.
She's a woman who believes in the life she lives.
Oh, he lives.
I know a woman who believes in flying horses.
Okay, so whether or not you have guessed why I played that song, we are going to continue on. And I want to say you're here with Dr. Padma Catell and Dr. Robin Reich. And I want to introduce Dr. Judye Hess. Judy is a psychologist, and she has been training graduate students for over 30 years and training them how to be therapists and how to get licensed and how to work with people. So she has lots of experience. And her particular topic that she's going to talk about this evening is going to be dual-dwelling duos. So why don't you start us off, Judy, and tell us what dual-dwelling duos is about.
Okay, well, basically, Dr. Padma Catell and myself wrote an article about 15 years ago that was published in a very elite journal, the Journal of Couples and Families. And we did that. We were both working at the same school together, and I needed to publish rather than perish, as you probably heard about. So Padma and I were both in situations where our partners were living separately from us. And we kind of liked it that way. And so we decided that maybe we could write an article about this. And so we managed to do it. So basically, it's the idea that people can be in love, committed, want to spend their lives together, but for one reason or another, they don't have the desire to live in the same home. And we expanded this to be people who maybe want to live in the same house but have separate rooms, or even long distance where people live thousands of miles away from each other. But the idea is that it's not just a matter of circumstance that they're choosing this mode, that they actually want this mode. It could be that they and their partners have very different styles of furnishing, or maybe one's very messy and the other one is a neatnik. Whatever the thing is that makes it difficult to live together without a lot of bickering, this could be a solution to that, because it doesn't take away the love that you feel for your partner, but it's just that for a number of different reasons, this is what you're choosing. And since this must be quite a while, 15 years, I've heard from so many people who've said, oh my God, I would love that, or I don't have the nerve to do that, or we've been doing that, but we were so ashamed of it, we didn't want to tell anybody. Or people thought, oh, they're on the verge of divorce if they're not even living together, or that's not a real relationship, or whatever. But we have stayed with our premise that it's a perfectly valid relationship, whether you're married or not married. It doesn't really matter. It's just a question of choosing to have your own space. Being in California, people talk a lot about having their own space. And I guess most of you listeners are probably in California, so you probably heard about that. But anyway, should I stop now?
Yeah, I'll just comment a little bit. I think when we were writing the article, what I've noticed since then is there have been quite a few other people who have called this dynamic other things, but the idea was that Judye and I felt that people's concepts about what it meant to be in a committed relationship were very, very limited to one particular model. Actually, back then, much more so than now, a heterosexual living together, perhaps married, but definitely living together if you were in a committed relationship. And if you didn't kind of take that step and move on to that somehow your relationship wasn't serious, or you weren't committed, or you didn't want to be monogamous or something. So we really felt that there weren't any alternative models. And so we wanted to at least present one. We totally understand that it might not be the one for everyone, but that's in fact the point. There isn't one for everyone. And the idea was that you have to figure out your own model. And we just happened to know of ourselves and a couple of other people who we were teaching with, as a matter of fact, who had these long-term committed relationships. Some of them were actually married, but still not living together. I was married for a couple of years and not living with my partner. And they were perfectly happy with that arrangement for whatever their own personal reason may have been. And we wanted to at least get it out there in the world that choices are possible. You don't have to have something wrong with you. You don't have to, not want to be in a relationship in order to have a good, healthy relationship with a different model. So that was sort of the impetus behind our deciding to undertake the chore of writing an article and getting it published.
I just want to say that about a year ago, I met a couple who had lived separate, had just started living together, but they'd been a couple for 18 years. And the issue was that they both had children, And they both had very, very different parenting styles. And they knew it simply wouldn't work if they all moved in together. It didn't alter the fact that they loved one another and were committed to one another.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And of course, you also do hear the stories, which people doesn't get a lot of airplay, where people are okay in their relationship and then they move in together and they're not okay, that they start to run into a lot of bumps in the road or difficulties or differences in style. I could really understand the thing about raising children. I could see where that would really bring out all of your core differences and have a lot of charge attached to it, because here's this child that you're trying to bring up the right way. And if you and your partner differ about this, I think that could create a tremendous amount of friction. So I could really understand Robin's example.
You know, the blended family is a perfect situation for that. And there's several other little groups of people out there for whom it's very positive alternative. And sometimes older people who already have their own houses and they're settled and they don't really want to move. And they meet somebody and they enjoy spending time together. And then if they don't actually move in together, it keeps the romance alive. It's more like dating, and you're excited to see someone rather than, oh, God, they're always here and I can't get any time for myself. And so there have been a lot of little groups out there who have said, this is just what I need. And maybe you're one of those people. So this show is for you.
And I think time for yourself is a really important issue. Some people need more of it than others. Some people can only be intimate for limited periods of time. The idea of 7 days a week of being open with someone else is too much. And that's okay. You know?
Yes, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you if you don't fit into the kind of standard model that we were all raised with. I mean, I have much to say also, I won't say it in this program, about being single, which is another model which is perfectly healthy. But our society doesn't lead us to believe that it's perfectly healthy. Our society leads us to believe that we should be coupled and then we should live with our partner and get married, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that we need to broaden our ideas about what's okay.
And the research shows that things have changed radically even since we wrote this article, because the average age of marriage for a woman used to be 24, 25, and now it's 30, 31. I mean, in a short period of time, it's really changed a lot. So it's not just a pipe dream that we're putting these ideas out. I mean, whoever thought gay marriage was going to become legal and necessary and a federal law at this point. I mean, so you never know what's going to happen. Whenever we tried to get a book contract for this book, people would say, well, you're ahead of your time. How many people are really going to buy this book? And well, we never did get it published, but now we called it the DDD, which was the Dual Dwelling Duos. Now it's getting known as the LAT, which is Living Alone Together. And every few months I get some notice that somebody's writing about the LATs. And so, I mean, the only downside is that it's more expensive. Of course, people would say that, to have 2 apartments rather than 1. But, I mean, our mental health is sometimes more important than money.
And
so
I think when you say that, I don't know, but I would guess it's a phenomenon that you see more in people who are somewhat older and established in their careers and can afford dual apartments. I think people in their 20s, for example, especially in New York, say, can't really afford 2 residences.
Right.
Well, they often can't even afford one residence,
Right.
which is why a lot of older persons, young adults, are living with their parents nowadays. But I think that is an important issue, but I think it's a separate issue from the cultural pressure to, couple and live together. I do realize if we really want to go back into it, it has to do with the idea of a man owning a woman. When he gets married to her, she becomes his property. Times when women could not inherit any money of their own and had to depend on a man, quote, to take care of them. But it's kind of morphed into a cultural norm. Aside from those things, many women now have their own jobs and are financially self-sufficient.
And I think some people choose to take jobs that are in a different location than their spouse. It's not that they're forced to. It's agreed upon by both partners that they'll each go ahead and follow their careers and still be a couple and get together often enough.
Yeah, and have it be exciting and thrilling and fun. Now, there's two sides to every coin. I think my personal opinion is that the thing that frequently motivates people is cultural pressure to do it the way everyone's expected to do it, and fear that if you don't have someone living with you or, with you all the time, that they are going to become interested in someone else. And that, to me, that has a kind of more deeper rooted issue of insecurity and not feeling special and many psychological things that go along with it. But I don't think that a lot of people examine why they want to be together or what is the motivation. I don't think there's anything wrong with the financial motivation or even an insecure motivation, as long as you're conscious of the fact that that's why you're doing it.
The thing I think that is often problematic with this idea is that you need two people who want to do this. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, oh, that sounds great, I would love that. And then you ask your partner and they say, why would you ever want to do that? So then it's probably not going to work, and that maybe you'll need something else, like a separate room in a house or whatever. But I mean, it's not a great thing to just have a baby because your partner wants to, or live separately because your partner wants to. It's really does. I mean, it's kind of radical, and if both people aren't really up for it, then I really don't see how it could work. It could just create more problems.
I think it's also, well, let me go back a step. I'm reading a book that's a memoir, a memoir called It's What I Do, and a photographer's life of love and war. This is written by a woman who is a photojournalist and has documented primarily war zones. And for the first many years of her life, she had relationships that didn't last long, or where the partner couldn't tolerate her long absences, and she came to accept cheating as just part of the bargain not to come back to an empty apartment. And we're at the stage now where she has met someone who is equally committed to work that takes him away and says, I'll be here when you come back. Just come back.
Yeah, I think that, it really gets back to some basic ideas about what is loving someone and caring about a unique individual in this world who may or may not fit your every exact ideal of what you want. I like to give the example of couples who say they really love each other and one wants to have kids and one doesn't, because that's a pretty extreme example and people can identify with it. Well, it's the issue of what do? Do you trade in the partner that you love for some unknown fantasy partner who maybe, one hopes, would want to have the children with you? Or do you stay with the person you love and give up something that's big, like having children? I mean, that is a real dilemma. But the dual-dwelling duos idea does, probably indirectly, but in my mind, is really connected to the idea that there's a special person in the world who you care about. And you don't have to be with them 24 hours a day. You're not going to forget about them or find someone to replace them, because they are the person that you love. So I think that gets a little more complicated for some people.
Yes.
I'm thinking about the song that you played.
And that's why I played that song. Judy figured it out.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, there's a few different ways I heard it, which were she believes in
flying horses.
Flying horses. Well, I mean, it could be that living separately, you get to keep more of your fantasies about that person rather than seeing what they look like when they, just got up in the morning or who knows what. They
drool at night.
Yeah, right. And so that could be part of it. It's also a way of saying people are, the two people are independent. They can totally do their own things, and then they can come together and either share those things or share whatever it is that they have that they want to share. And this whole idea that this person you're going to meet is going to meet all your needs, I think we've worn that one out, unless people are in tremendous amounts of denial. Maybe that works for them, but this person is the perfect on every level. I don't think that really happens. Humans are too complex with too many different needs and talents and skills and just interests to just mesh so perfectly. And this is a way to kind of have it both ways. You get your life the way you want it, your friends, your interests, and you get this other person too. So if it works for you, it's a pretty good deal, I think.
I want to take it from the other end for a minute, because I actually like living with my husband. I would not be happy living separately. On the other hand, I like it that we each can go off on our own, either for an evening or for days or a week, whatever it may be. If someone couldn't grant me that freedom, I doubt that I'd be with them at all, whether living together or living apart. So I think even when you like being together, it's okay to be apart at times. And I've often had people look at me with incredulity that I would travel without my husband. It's not so much for a man because he's going on business or whatever.
Yes, I want to say you're listening to KGGV 95.1 FM, and we are a call-in program, and the phone number is 869-1131. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment about this topic, please give us a call. We'd love to hear from you. And we also have in the studio, we are lucky to have Judy's partner, the other dual-dwelling duo. And I don't know if he wants to comment or say anything about his perspective on, look at this listening audience, a male perspective here on this show. Do you want to say something, Simon?
Well, I don't have a whole lot to say. It works for us and our particular personalities, our particular preferences. It's not for everybody. We'd probably tear each other to pieces if we lived together. So for us, we live a block apart. So it's really the perfect distance for us. And, we do spend a lot of time with each other and see each other every day. So it works for us.
Mm-hmm. So there you have a male perspective on the show, where we know we frequently are giving the female perspective. And just to say, when I was first married, my husband and I lived separately for 2 years, and that worked perfectly fine. He lived in Petaluma, and I lived down in Marin County, and we saw each other mostly on the weekends, maybe once during the week. We didn't see each other every day, and we didn't live a block away from each other. We lived 40 miles away from each other. And for us, that worked very fine also. We were, we loved each other. It wasn't like we didn't want to be together, but it worked. He had his inventory for his work and a storage place where he worked, and he needed a lot of space. And I lived in a teeny little apartment in Marin, which was it certainly would not have accommodated his work stuff. And we were just perfectly happy. And the only reason it changed really is because he had to leave the location where he was living, because the owner of the house, the mother-in-law of the owner of the house, was literally going to move in. And then we did live together, and that was perfectly fine. So I want to say for the record, the main point is that people find a way that works for them. I do happen to know that Robin and her husband had a long-distance relationship before they were married for I don't know how long, but I know it was, I know that happened. And it's interesting because, as I think of it this second, that might have actually contributed to the impetus to want to live in the same place, because you started the relationship not living in the same place.
Yes, we were 8,000 or 9,000 miles apart. That's another story altogether.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to think, how does that play into this, And I think Judy's really right when she says you have to have two people who agree that this is a model that they want to have. I mean, I think that's true for any model of the relationship that you have. If you're in the relationship, hopefully the two people are in agreement about the model that they're going to have, whether it's marriage, whether it's living together, whether it's dual dwelling duos, or whether it's polyamory, or whatever the model is. I certainly am all for gays having the right to marry. I have a little bit of skepticism around the general idea that that's what everyone should do as a model. I wish that the model were broader. It isn't. I get that. And I certainly don't want people not to have rights that they deserve and should have. I do want people to have more choices about how they form their relationships.
Well, the whole idea of being able to live together outside of marriage is really pretty new. Very new. In my lifetime, and when I started graduate school 50 or so years ago, there were a few people living together, but they'd have things like separate phones, so their families wouldn't know. It just wasn't done.
Right. I remember that too, and it seemed like overnight, all of a sudden, living together without being married was the way to go, because then you would test out the marriage or the relationship before you got married. And I mean, people you would never dream would be doing some alternative form of relationship like living together without being married. We're all of a sudden doing it. So these things change really quickly, and we just don't know exactly when or if this one will take off in the same way. But I don't know. We've been talking about it for quite a long time, and it keeps coming up. So I think there is a basic human need that some people feel once they can break through from the society telling them what they should do, and this is how to be normal if you do this. But if you can break that down, you might just find yourself happier. I know I only came to this idea after I moved in with a partner that I'd been living separately from for 8 years. And we moved into a place together, and it was horrible. and that's when I decided, it just doesn't work for me. So when I met Simon, I told him my plan, and he said, "Oh, that sounds pretty good to me." So I knew we were at least had possibilities, and here we are 17 years later. That is
That's
a long time.
That's a wonderful thing to say, though, on the air. I mean, that this model has worked for 17 years for you.
Yeah, and we're both shocked that it has. But like he said, I don't think it would have worked so well the other way. So it's kind of saved us in a way.
I also think that the part-time living apart model has been around for longer than we sometimes think about. I mean, the English in India would send their wives off to the cool spot for many months of summer, and
The cool spot being England.
sometimes in the mountains or wherever. And certainly there are people who go to summer residences. It used to be at least the wife and children. The husband would come up on weekends or come out on weekends. And I think that gave people a lot of space.
Yeah, I think that's really a good point. The idea of people being together all the time is more like 20th century, probably. 20th century idea, at least in some places.
Yeah.
Before that, I think, the man would go out west to check out what it was like out in California, and wife would stay back east with the kids, and he'd be gone for a year checking out what it was like, and then maybe say, come out and join me. And it didn't seem to be that much of an issue at that point. I guess that was practicality. It was
Yes.
looked at differently.
And also in the society was this belief that merging was the healthy way to go. We've been together for 50 years, and every single day we share all of our time. That would be, you must really love each other then. And this idea of separateness has really been slower to take on because of maybe it does go back to the necessity for togetherness and for the financial and the homemaker people to be together so they could raise the family and continue the whole generational progression. But as we find out more about people, we know that being together all the time is no magical thing. And it's great if that's what you do, but it's also great if that's not what you do. It's really so much is about knowing yourself, and how do you know yourself? Because you have to try and make mistakes too. It's not like, I'll try it and then it's terrible. But you have to keep finding out for your whole life, I think, what is going to work for you and what's going to make you happy. And
I just want to announce that you're listening to Ask the Shrinks, and tonight our guest is Dr. Judye Hess, and this is Dr. Padma Catell,
And Dr. Robin Reich.
Robin Reich.
And it's now 8:34.
Thank you. And how about we talk a little bit, if you want to give us a call, it's 869-1131. And Judye, you want to talk a little bit just about the downside, like what could be wrong and what problems could, I'm sure you've thought about that over the last 17, 18 years.
What's wrong with this dual dwelling duo thing? Well, I guess the most obvious one is children, right? That there is still, I think, very prevalent this kind of fantasy, or who knows if it's fantasy or reality, but that we are going to get together and move in, and we're going to have children, and then our parents are going to have the grandchildren, and there's just a way that the society kind of goes. And so one thing that you may have to give up is all that approval for what you're doing. Just like, how many, today might be different, but in the past, how many gay people can come out to their family and the family say, "Oh, that's wonderful. That's just what we always wanted." it's the society really determines what is on people's minds as okay or not. And so so you do have to give up a little bit when you're living separately. And I mean, there's a lot of questioning. And then with the children, we do know people who live in separate apartments in the same building, and they do have a child that goes back and forth. The child who's grown up now seems to be doing okay, but there could be questions about that. And how does the child answer that in school? Well, my mom has this address and my dad has that address. And, I mean, again, now that so many things have changed, it seems hard to think that would be a big deal, but who knows? It could be. And then, I mean, like I know Dr. Catell, who has lived separately, is now living together with her husband in a lovely house, which we just visited last night, and it seemed very sweet to have a little house like that and to fix it up together. And well, are we missing out on something because we're so fixed in this thing has to be this way? So, whenever I have a little poster on my wall that says, I chose the road less traveled, and where the hell am I now?
I love that.
Well, Judye is bringing up a good point, which is that every choice that we make in life is a trade-off. You get some things and you lose some things. And the thing that I was thinking about when I played Flying Horses was that people can be free to believe in what they believe. If you believe in flying horses, I believe in flying horses. That's a real secret about me. Not too many people know that. Now a lot of people know.
I do too.
But it's hard to buck what society is saying, what you should do. It's certainly hard with regard to relationships, as gay people have been finding out forever. But it takes a certain amount of security to do that. Now, just to be perfectly clear, I don't think, I don't think, and I don't think Judye thinks that there is anything at all wrong with loving someone and living with them. If that works for you, that's terrific. I do want to say that my darling husband and I have a house where there's a lot of rooms.
We noticed that.
We have different levels that we kind of hang out on and different studies, and there's plenty of room. And for me, and him too, it wouldn't work if we didn't have a lot of separate space. It's just our personalities would bump into each other, shall we say, if that were not. They bump into each other anyway, but obviously not as much. But
I think that's important. A very long time ago, before I thought of the possibility of living, I think it was before I was even married the first time. I'm not sure. It was a long time ago. A good friend of mine said that she was firmly of the opinion that to stay married and sane and with a family, there should be at least 2 rooms for every person. And I think that's true. I think people, not necessarily the number, but people need to be able to get away from each other in the same house, to be doing... I was interestingly thinking about this last night. I grew up in a family where we all lived together, but my father could be watching television in one room while I was doing my homework in another, and my brother was off doing whatever he was doing, and my mother was someplace else in the house, and that was fine. And we came together at dinner time, but we didn't have to have togetherness all the time.
You had separate spaces if you wanted it, huh?
Yes.
Yeah.
I realize in New York that's often an impossibility.
Yes, it was an impossibility the way I grew up, but I often think back about that. I grew up in a four-room apartment, and there were 4 people living in it. So generally speaking, there was someone in every room except the bathroom or a closet that you were in. I did frequently choose to be in a closet or a bathroom to, get away from everybody. But somehow people were not, well, certainly my brother and dad were not in the least bit intrusive. So I would be there reading a book for hours and hours and hours, and nobody would talk to me, and that made me perfectly happy. Scott, on the other hand, has 5 brothers and sisters, and he really, really needed, and still to this day needs, to have his own space that really he can go into, and no brothers and sisters or wives or anyone is going to constantly be in there with him. So I think people have to respect what their individual needs are and go with it.
That's interesting. I never knew that about your growing up, but in my family, we're all from New York, right?
Yes.
Not originally. That's
No.
why I had a big enough house to grow up in.
Right. Well, my dad he's gone now, so I can talk about him. He was a psychoanalyst.
We know he's not listening. Is that what
Yeah,
you think
right.
he is? I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, poor you.
Sorry, Dad. But he had his office in our home and in a lovely Central Park West apartment, which sounds so nice, but his office was the second bedroom. And so my sister and I were forced to sleep on the living room couch that opened up into a bed.
Oh, so you didn't even have a bedroom to yourselves?
We had no room at all. I mean, it's like, okay, got to get up and make the bed up so the patients can see the living room, and then we go into my parents' bedroom, sleep for another hour, and it was madness. And so I am quite sure that now having my own little 5-room apartment with my own backyard is good karma that I lucked out into a place like this, because I feel like I just never had my own room to put my stuffed animals, my dolls, just my things. And so I'm sure that our backgrounds contribute to our interests now, and that we find people that need space. Right?
Have you thought about that before, that you never had any space as a kid, and now you really
every day?
I see. So you're very, very conscious of that, huh?
My husband was one of 4 children. The other 3 siblings were all sisters, which creates something interesting. I don't know. I have to ask whether they had their own
How many rooms there were?
Or not.
Did he have his own? Do you know?
I don't know. What I do know is that he has a very different conception of personal property than I do. If it's in the house, it's ours. The pens are all ours. I think he would even think a toothbrush was ours. And
Except you don't think so, Zoe.
I grew up in a family where everybody had their own things, and you borrowed only with permission. And it's taken us a little while to get used to that.
Yeah, oh, yes, that's really very different. Yes.
Wow. Toothbrush. That's pretty extreme.
Actually, he's never tried my toothbrush, but he has taken my comb.
Oh, okay.
And your pens, I imagine.
My pens, every pen.
Every pen. Yeah, I mean, I think what's really interesting when you think about this topic and you listen to us is to see how people have to work out their relationships with a separate human being who grew up in a different way, and a different family, a different number of rooms, and a different ethic, a different ethos, and how each one of us has to learn, if you want to be in an intimate relationship with someone, how to work with that. I would say, I don't want to say adapt to it. I want to say work with it, be with it, and have it not ruin your relationship, because everybody is different than everybody else. And even probably his sisters wouldn't want him taking their pens all the time if he, who knows, right? I don't
Need
know.
to bring him in here.
Yes, right.
I just don't know.
Yeah.
But I think everything, was pretty much shared in the.
Yeah, see,
Which
even
is
though
like that mergy
I
kind
mean,
of thing.
not clothes. Or
that's because he was the boy. That didn't have to
That's a
share.
good thing he didn't share their clothes.
but it was certainly a much more communal environment than I grew up in. And I think that might have to do again with numbers and money. And
It's very interesting because we grew up in a teeny space, a former apartment. I don't know how many, probably, I don't know, maybe 1,200 square feet, maybe not. But everybody's stuff was their stuff. So if I left a book open to page whatever, I'd find it in the same exact place, no matter who had come and gone from that room. That was very much respected. And, my school things or my pens or my purse or whatever was totally inviolate. Nobody would go into my purse to look for a pencil. It just, that was the ethic
that was mine.
that we grew up.
Um,
It's interesting.
On the other hand, to this day, and I have had to get used to it. I can't say I like it. My husband will get into my car and toss everything around to suit himself. It drives me nuts. I've had to learn not to go nuts. But he thinks that it's perfectly fine.
Thinks nothing of it, huh?
No.
Great.
So did you guys ever go to couples therapy?
It wasn't that serious. We haven't been.
No,
but
I mean, I just as a therapist,
Yes,
I believe in that. Not that it's a problem that you have to go for, but just that it's a very important way to sort things out. I mean, we've certainly done our share of that, and but I mean, sometimes it. I mean, actually, for people listening, I just want to say that too. That I know shrinks get a bad rap, and they're trying to rip everybody off and all that people think. But the fact is that you can get pretty inexpensive therapy these days, and it's really incredible how much just having a third person, neutral person in the room that can understand both of your positions, because usually it's like you think the other person's crazy and they think you're crazy for having that point of view. And when somebody can sit there and, well, yeah, that makes sense. Well, that makes sense too. It brings it down a little bit,
Again, both partners have to be receptive to the idea. And my husband comes from a whole culture which doesn't, quote, air quotes, believe in therapy unless you're crazy.
Yes. So, I mean, Judy and Robin and I, we speak from the perspective of therapists. We believe in therapy. We believe it's helpful. That doesn't necessarily mean that our partners are of the same ilk. And I think one thing that Judy said, though, was important, which is when you go to therapists, which I do believe in, even just saying it out loud and having the other person hear it is different when there's a therapist in the room, when there's a third person in the room, because we all get so activated and triggered by our issues and other people's issues that sometimes we really just can't even hear what they're saying. Whereas when you go to therapy, it's a different format, so you can listen, you can hear, and that in and of itself will really often transform a situation.
But Robin's right. It's got to take two people. Otherwise, it's, I've seen people where one was dragged in and, nothing really
nothing
happened.
On the other hand, I've gone to couples therapy on my own where there's this obviously empty seat next to me. And that's been useful because the therapist was working as a couples therapist and helped me understand what my husband might be feeling.
Yes.
Or
Yes. Yes. A
And
couple
why?
of therapists could do that with one person. I mean, say, okay, now if you were Peter or Scott or Simon, what would you say in response to Padma, Robin, or Judy's comment? And I think that's a we've talked about that in terms of negotiating, going into the other person's shoes can be a very valuable way to do it.
Yeah, and more recently, I've been thinking about the idea of being able to come from your heart rather than from your critical mind. And I know I'm so automatic on my critical mind that I don't even, if I'm in that mode, I'm not even thinking about my heart. But if I can actually remember, okay, well, what if this person weren't just this horrible, crazy, moronic person, but I had some compassion for him, what would it look like then? And even for just a second, I can get a little softer.
It transforms you.
I'm working on it because I feel like I've inherited this from many generations of Jewish critical mothers, and what's wrong with it, and there's also what's right with it, and there's maybe you can understand it and it's a little bit better. So I just think all of these things help, and if we can get ourselves to be a little more flexible and try things out rather than just saying this is the way it is, I can't stand this, you have to change, we might get more of what we need and want. Yeah.
One of the promises my husband made all by himself during our wedding ceremony was that he would never try to change me. And pretty much he hasn't. And I'm kind of strange, so. But I think I've respected him in the same way, with some minor exceptions. And I'm reminded almost every day of why I love him. I mean, he'll say something cute or give me a look that I know well, or and coming from heart, I have to remember that when I get to my car and find everything tossed around.
Yes. Well, folks, it is 8:55, and I'm going to sign off for this evening. We'll be back next Thursday at 8 o'clock for Ask the Shrinks, and good evening.
Streaming live at kggv.blogspot.com.